Welcome to American Issues Take Two. I'm Tim Apicella, filling in for Jay Fidel. And today's title is War Crimes Warrant for Putin, ICC's move. A lot of people don't know what the ICC stands for. It stands for the International Criminal Court. And what the ICC has done recently is put an arrest warrant out for Vladimir Putin for war crimes. And specifically, what war crimes would that be? In this particular case, it would be the abduction and deportation of children. And so to discuss this topic, I will go to our guests. I'd like to welcome our special esteemed guest, Manfred Henningsen, Professor Emeritus of University of Hawaii, Manoa, and our co-host, filling in for Tim Apicella, who's now playing the part of host, Stephanie Stahl-Dalton. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Manfred, to you, how important is it that the ICC actually issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin? And is it symbolic, or is there some real weight behind it?
Well, it's both, but I think the weight is behind the symbolic. I think the ICC has done a tremendous job in other cases, and there were trials before the ICC, connected with Yugoslavia, the wars in Yugoslavia, and then in Rwanda. But in this case, it's a message, I think, that is very, very important, even if nothing may come of it for the rest of the year or for some time. But Putin himself is now restricted in his travel patterns, at least to some extent. So for that reason, I think the message is more important than the possibility that they really get him. Was the ICC responsible for Milosevic capture, yes, or was that a different organization? No, those were the Yugoslav trials, and the same with Rwanda. I mean, you see, the ICC is a very interesting creature, and you have to remember, whatever the celebrations you have in the United States is not part of it. When the ICC was accepted by the United Nations, the United States belonged to 7 countries that did not sign on to it. China was another one, Iraq, Yemen, Qatar. America, in a way, you could say, has a bad conscience. It's the same with, remember, the Genocide Convention, which was passed in 1948, and it took the US 40 years until strangely enough, the Reagan administration in the 1980s signed on to the Genocide Convention. So the United States, cannot be proud of its behavior in that regard.
Yeah, let me follow up on that point. I mean, does it strike you as odd that the United States could not or would not be a signatory to the ICC, yet Russia did in 2000 and withdrew, or it never ratified it, but then withdrew in 2016? At least they signed on. Does that strike you as odd?
Well, yes, but remember, there's a history behind all of that. I remember once giving a talk to American officers on Holocaust Remembrance Day in a bunker in Korea. You have these really incredible bunker systems there that were built during World War II, and they are occupied by all kinds of intelligence agencies. And so there were maybe 40 officers who wanted me to talk about the Holocaust and other genocides. And I said to them right at the beginning, you are responsible your officers are responsible for the United States not having signed, for example, the Genocide Convention in 48, and have not signed on to the ICC. And they asked me, what do you mean? I said, well, there are people in the Senate who think that you are capable of committing war crimes. And that's why they refuse to sign on to the ICC. And these officers were really angry, not at me, but at the Senate. But, it's quite remarkable. The ICC should have come in business after Nuremberg and Tokyo. Nuremberg ended in 46, Tokyo ended in, the International Tribunal ended it in 48. And there were discussions about having a permanent international criminal court. But it was the beginning also of the Cold War, but I mean, the US especially was against it because Southern senators were afraid that Black and Native American organizations would use not only the convention, but the institutional apparatus that could have come into place in order to launch reparation charges against the United States government. That's the background. And in a way, you could say this background is still in place when it comes to the lack of the American support of the ICC.
Well, and thank you very much for bringing that history to the forefront, because Stephanie, when this announcement was made, I mean, automatically the flag of hypocrisy kind of was set up the flagpole. And that is, what about the invasion of Iraq and some of the atrocities that did happen in Iraq and Afghanistan? And to what degree was Abu Ghraib a part of these allegations? And the hypocrisy that the United States stands for, Ukraine and stands against the war crimes committed by Russia and Putin. Yet here we are with our own kind of stain behind us. Are those allegations of hypocrisy? Are they valid, in your opinion?
Well, I appreciate all that information, Manfred. So interesting, and I think that we're shading our actions in the past. Somehow we get stuck in this angelic view of ourselves, while we really, especially the Iraq War has been on the media quite a bit lately. And the issues abided there, and that the mistakes that were made. So, I mean, for me, it's been a little bit of a turmoil hearing about all of this, because it directly relates to the Ukraine situation and Russia's invasion. So that's a really interesting question, Tim. That's a really tough.
Well, it's a hard question to ask because no one likes to bring that up. And in fact, I'll go a little bit further here. And again, I don't take any pleasure bringing this up, but we had Jeff Sessions, our Attorney General, who cited Romans 13 when legal asylum seekers from Mexico were entering into the United States, and their children were snatched away from them and put in basically cages. Mm-hmm. It's one thing to cite the Bible, but it's another thing to actually do that which is reprehensible. Where do we go from here as far as trying to support the ICC, Ukraine, and be a cheerleader against war crimes, yet at the same time, we're not a signatory to the ICC, and we've got a checkered past?
Well, I think we have the long shadow from our historical moves. I mean, we've cited problems in the past, right? I mean, Hawaii being taken over by America, et cetera. I mean, and even up to lately, I mean, the shadows are on us still from all of these moves in the past, and certainly more recently, in this century. So what does that do for us? I mean, it's kind of a wake-up call, if we can have it, that our fractured government situation has led to focus on really less important items than what we really need to be dealing with as a nation. I'm sure you all will agree. We have to pull ourselves back into these international conversations and defending our decisions or rationalizing them for others to understand why those, as you say, Manfred, that kind of indefensible justification for not joining the ICC to begin with. So these are worrisome issues.
So did that help Putin basically flaunt the arrest warrant when he went to Ukraine here recently and went to Mariupol and made sure that it was being videoed as he was driving into the town?
Well, I'm sure
I don't think so. I mean, look, Putin's image has become soiled, and I think he cannot take that dirt off in the way he thinks he can do that in Russia itself. So for that reason, I think whatever you may think of the move of the ICC, I think it was surprising that they did it. I totally support it. Now, nothing will come of it. There will be no arrests, even though, there are always possibilities later on. But I think the same thing one could say about the United States' attitude toward the ICC. I do not think there's any chance that at this point, the United States will become a signatory part of the ICC. Right. It's sad. So in that sense, you could say there is not only hypocrisy, but this is really a thing that stains the reputation of the United States.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
But you have to, I have been dealing with that for some time. You have to remember that when the allies of World War II were considering trials against the Germans and the Japanese, there were negotiations taking place in June of 1945 in London, and the American chief prosecutor for Nuremberg, Robert Jackson, he was a Supreme Court judge, urged or, somehow made it clear to the other partners. He had the Soviet prosecutor, the British and the French in the room, and he told them they should not include genocide in the indictment, because if they do that, the German defense team will use that against us for all the kind of ethnic problems that we have in our own societies, or because of colonialism, the violence, in the colonial empires. But I think one of the major reasons for Jackson not wanting to have genocide in the indictment, he wanted to protect the Soviets, because, after 45, the news about the Gulag system became so prominent that he felt the German defense would use that against the indictment as well. So that's why you do not have genocide, especially meaning the Holocaust, including in the indictment in Nuremberg. That comes in 1948.
So do you think the ICC did this without consulting the United States?
Yes.
So was the United States and the Biden administration caught flat-footed with this arrest warrant for Putin?
I don't know whether they were surprised by it, but I do not think they have anything. Well, I at least haven't heard about that they had any influence in making this decision.
President Biden said it was, quote, as justified, and the ICC had a very strong point. That's a direct quote from our president.
Yeah, but look, if the American president, who knows his country has not signed onto it for political and ideological and all kinds of other reasons, makes the statement that's very nice, but nothing follows of that.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, I mean, it's a kind of window dressing.
That kind of goes to the first part of the question was, to what degree is this symbolic or have some real gravitas behind it? And
well, I think
I like your answer.
Has gravitas. So in that sense, I will not dismiss the importance of the symbolic impact. This is the first indictment by the ICC of a leading politician, of one of the major powers in the world. For that reason, I think whatever critical comments you can make about the attitude of the United States in general, but I think it's a very, very important sign.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Stephanie, do you think the United States plays a greater role as far as, I don't know, intelligence for if Putin flaunts this arrest warrant and decides to travel internationally? Is there the possibility that Vladimir Putin could actually be captured like Milosevic was back in the day in 1999? He was actually captured. Do you think that's a possibility that could occur with Vladimir Putin?
Well,
and would the United States have any hand in it if we were given the opportunity?
Oh, and if we were called upon and asked to help, I would hope that we're in position and have the status that some of these other countries who are in that organization, who will make a serious effort to get him if they can, and if they wanted help, that our administration then would provide that help. But
what international consequences would there be if Vladimir Putin was captured and hauled off to the Hague?
Well, it's about whether he has standing back in Russia, if he's got support back in Russia that would reach out to speak to that, or would they celebrate? I mean, I think that would be very interesting. And these countries, and Manfred probably knows all of the countries in the ICC, are any of them capable of stepping up to this kind of SEAL team?
Well, look at Israel and the Mossad. I mean, my gosh, they're one of the premier intelligence organizations in the world, yet they're not a signatory to the ICC, and they don't recognize its authority. But would they like to see Vladimir Putin put away? I don't know, maybe.
Really
I don't think so. I mean, Netanyahu's strange behavior and this autocratic, authoritarian regime that you have now in Israel, I think is not a good sign. I do not think Mossad, whatever capabilities they have, and I'm sure you watch Fauda on Netflix, this incredible story where you have both sides, looking somewhat similar. I do not think they will do that. Now, I think what we have, this indictment may become important if Putin should begin to lose power in Russia, and if his position weakens there. And there is no way of predicting how long this guy will stay in power. I mean, he has all kinds of problems in his country. It would be wonderful if Navalny, would not be in prison, but if he would have stayed in Berlin and not gone back to Russia. But he is in prison and he may die. What his death will do, I don't know. But I mean, Putin's situation in Russia is not as safe and secure as people think it is. So for that
that's true. We don't really know what's going on, do we?
Right. But for that reason, I think this indictment is very important. It shows the power elites in Russia and the military elites how isolated Russia has become, and the image in parts of the world, not everywhere. I mean, there are countries where his image has not changed. On the contrary, there are countries where he has regained in authority as a result of his crazy behavior in the Ukraine. But I think overall, the indictment is not only an empty symbolic gesture, it is a very important gesture, and it becomes reality once he is beginning to lose or has already lost his power. Because then they can move in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me ask you both the same question, and Manfred, I'll go with you first on this. How does the world, or how does China, or how does the United States negotiate a peace plan in Ukraine when you're sitting across the table from someone who has an international ICC criminal arrest warrant for him? How do you negotiate that peace treaty sitting across the table?
Well, look, I do not think that the United States will be moving in the direction of taking charge of.
I grant that. Yeah, you're right. They won't.
So for that reason, I mean, they cannot do that. They would simply undermine their own.
We'll probably see Turkey have a bigger hand in that. You're right.
Well, I hope after Erdogan loses the election in May, which is still not clear
Yeah.
that he will, but I hope that the earthquake really shattered his political standing. But at this point, you cannot talk about peace negotiations as long as the Ukrainians refuse to even consider that.
Yeah.
Good point. Stephanie, same question to you. I mean, granted, I don't know who the player is to bring Russia and Ukraine to the table. I don't have that crystal ball in front of me. But how is it that you do negotiate eventually, I think, a settlement to hostilities and this war of war crimes with the guy who's got an arrest warrant out for him for war crimes?
Well, I think that it's an interesting question because I believe what's shown through the Putin China visitation is that Putin understands this dynamic, and he understands how he must have status, and he must keep his status for internal reasons and internationally. So he meets with China's leader. So these two autocracies are pairing up as they're on the world stage, giving more status to Putin, who has nothing much to compare with even what China has. But China has its issues and has its dependencies, on what it is that Putin does. And they have, many historical differences that can get in the way of their relation. But the important thing is he's making this impression and putting Russia in this parity scene with China. And they do have some,
Really good point, and that was going to be part of our discussion today, although it wasn't on the title, and that is the China visit to Vladimir Putin. And I don't know what you thought of it, or by appearance sake, but it looked like China was, the lead dog in this race, and that Putin kind of looked like the lapdog of this race, and the importance of China to come to Russia. And obviously, Russia had their hat in their hand, looking for support. Now, to what degree Putin gets that from China is a whole nother story. But what was your impression of the visuals that we saw of them sitting together and some of the proclamations that were made and some of the, I think there were minimal agreements or partnership agreements that were signed and executed. But what was your impression, Stephanie?
Well, I think my impression is that Putin's trying to show his strength. He's trying to show
Did it work?
A player. Okay, and because certainly China needs the oil from Russia, but China doesn't want to be dependent on that Russian oil. But they all have a stake in getting some railroad connections built. So Putin's picking up pieces of marbles that he still has, to work with, and doing very well in playing with this superpower and casting himself in the role of the other superpower. And so
was he,
really?
In your opinion, was he successful in that portrayal of his power?
Well, I'm thinking he might be, because right now it might be that
All right.
he gets points. Yeah.
Manfred, to you, the same question. What was your impression of that visit, and what did you see or didn't see that was favorable for Vladimir Putin?
Look, Xi Jinping has to be very careful how close he gets to Putin, because even though he likes the oil and gas from Russia, but he's not dependent on it. That he likes it now because it's cheap. He can get it cheaper than he could get anything before. So he is not dependent on Putin and Russia. He has to be careful because the Chinese economy is not in good shape. Mm-hmm. And the major trading partners with China are European, especially Germany. And so for that reason, he cannot go all the way in completely supporting Putin, sending weapons. He has to be, he has to be careful, because China is not as secure economically and in other respects as it was before. So for that reason, I think the appearance of closeness between Putin and Xi Jinping was symbolically important for maybe both societies. The Russians feel happy there is a big brother, who will come to our help. And the Chinese will say, look, we are not dependent only on these crazy Westerners, Americans and Europeans. We have this big brother called Russia. But I think we are in the realm of symbolics there.
Mm-hmm. Well, all the way around with the discussion of the ICC symbolic arrest warrant. So let me ask you this. What's the tipping point?
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I've got a lot of caffeine on board. Sorry. What do you think or estimate the tipping point is where China could potentially alienate its relationship, its trading partner with Germany and the EU? What action or actions would create a conflict and a retraction of trading partnerships?
Well, I do not think we are talking about cancellation of that relationship at this point. And you have to also remember that Germany is, even though it finds itself in a very interesting situation of being not internally troubled. I mean, like France and Great Britain and Italy, politically it's more stable than all of the other major European countries. But, Germany's car industry is so dependent on the Chinese market that the Germans will be very careful, how far they go in criticizing Xi Jinping. I mean, Scholz has good relations, it seems, with him, but how far that will go, I don't know. So in that sense, we are not at a point, where you get the kind of Cold War situation between the EU and Germany and China.
Well, isn't that one of the benefits of having a worldwide economy and international trading relationships, that you tend not to go to war or have, kinetic conflicts with your trading partners?
Well, I think that's part of Xi's or to China's leader's point, that he's got markets all over the world, that and Russia to some extent, but those have propelled China into this status of primary nation in the world. And what I see that they did was an ideological message too, is that here we can get together and do these things, even though we have these little bitty economies, nothing compared to the U.S. and a whole bunch of problems and intransigence on major issues. But they're up there saying, but we're two autocracies that are humming and working and making decisions together and important in the world. So the question about, is that a triangulation that includes the U.S., or are they trying to pull out and we don't have to deal with these Western democracies with all of their baggage and luggage and difficulties, because there's another way to do it and we're showing you how.
So is this setting the stage for increased conflicts, either militarily or economically, between the Western countries of the EU and the United States?
That's it showing. To me, it's suspicious in that manner. And I said railroads in the last comment, but it's pipeline. It's a huge pipeline that China's working on with Russia that's got to there to take care of that oil issue. And even Manfred says, China can't become dependent on them, but they could. But he's walking a fine line.
It's hard to say no to cheap oil.
Yeah, right. So, so it's a little bit frightening, I think, as China's sitting there also with the Taiwan mess, about to explode, if it is about to explode. So there's a lot of an unrealized agenda. The silent agenda is heavy with those two, but they're making
it's a complicated environment, to say the least. We've run out of time, so Manfred, I'm going to go to you for your last thoughts to try to make sense of that which we're seeing on the in TV news and with the ICC and this visit with China to Russia.
Look, I think the indictment of Putin, as I said, is very important in terms of its symbolism. And it will become, I think, threatening to Putin the weaker his position becomes within Russia itself. And you have also to realize that this war between Russia and Ukraine does a lot to undermine the very close economic relationships that existed before, not only between Germany and Russia, but between other European countries and Russia. So what you have there is the end of this semi-dependency of Germany and EU countries on Russia. We have to remember the Russian economy is an underdeveloped economy. It has not become better since the collapse of the Soviet Union. It is still inferior, much inferior to what you have in China, for example. And for that reason, it's very interesting. People have not really talked about it, that the war has led to an end of the dependency of Germany and other European countries on Russia's energy deliveries. But that has nothing to do with the indictment. The indictment, I think, is a different story. It simply contributes, to the uncertainty of Putin's presence in Russian politics itself.
All right. Well, thank you for those comments. Stephanie, you get the last word, your thoughts and or observations.
Oh, wait, thank you. I wanted to just pull on Manfred's thread that he mentioned earlier that had to do with Navalny. And Manfred has stated before that he's not pleased that that Navalny chose to return to Russia and get himself incarcerated, because it certainly does put him in a more difficult situation when an opportunity might arise. And I feel like this might be a bit of an opportunity, this indictment, especially if something is going on in the way of, capturing the discontent and the willingness of the people of Russia to take on new leadership in a using someone like Navalny. But I just wanted to point out that was a point I was glad he made, and that's also in there because we do have the hero. We have the Russian Navalny that could step into doing what's happening in Ukraine, and with that leader who came up from popular.
Good point.
So, you're right. Yes.
Yep. Yeah, I think we're all disappointed that he's been captured and incarcerated, and I agree with Manfred on a previous show that he could be doing so much more in Europe, or and speaking out against Putin than he can from a gulag somewhere, God knows where. All right. Well, we've run out of time, so say thank you, Stephanie. I'd like to thank our esteemed special guest, Manfred Henningsen, and thank you for joining us. And Stephanie Stahl-Dalton, appreciate it very much for your comments. I'm Tim Apicella, filling in for Jay Fidel for American Issues Take Two. Won't you please join us next week? And until then, aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.